All right. All right. Hello, everyone. Yes, we are live. Welcome to KabNET Live. I'm Joseph, and this podcast or live broadcast, or however you want to call it, is for anyone and everyone who wants to make sense of what's happening around us, of what's happening in our world. If you have a desire to go beyond the mundane commentary, to go beyond picking sides and being in favor of this and in favor of that, or scared of this and liking that, and in the midst of everything. And if you want to zoom out and sort of see things from a bird's eye view, if you want to put the pieces together, if you want to see the big picture, you're in the right place. And so today we're going to discuss a bunch of things that are happening in the world right now. There's social riots in Paris. There was a summit of world leaders. There is a prediction by mathematicians that is kind of daunting, but it's interesting, and we'll talk about that too. There's a lot that's happening in the world, but first, before we go into that, just to say a word about the wisdom of Kabbalah. The wisdom of Kabbalah is the science of human connection. It's about how all of us human beings are connected. And that's not just a general kind of poetic idea. It's a reality. We live in a network that binds us together, and the daily life that we see around us and everything that we see on the news and everything that we experience personally, socially, globally is on that network. It is a result of the connections in the network. So certainly when things happen that are that make for some turbulences or shocks socially, economically, politically even, they also result and stem from that same network that connects us. And so that is why we do want to look at the world and see what's happening here, but really in order to help us see the bigger picture, the deeper picture, that we're all connected, and how we can get a sense of that and perceive that and feel that more and more, despite of and even thanks to everything that's happening in our world. So we're going to go and discuss all of that right after this. All right, I'm already seeing Gary Time Loop on the chat here is asking, what prediction of mathematicians? That's a surprise, you know. We'll get to that in a few minutes. This is just also an opportunity to mention that you can send questions, thoughts, ideas, comments, anything you think will contribute to the discussion that we're trying to have on the chat, and I'll definitely relate to that. Also, later on, we're going to have Tal Mandelbaum, my dear friend, longtime Kabbalah student and psychologist, which will also give us a few takes on our discussion. So let's start. If you are, if you've watched the news in the last day or 2 days or 3 days, something like that, you've probably seen something about this, about what's happening in Paris, and actually throughout France. And what's happening there is that there are riots, social riots that are taking place. You have people that are vandalizing the streets, torching cars, pillaging shops, even the Marianne statue, which is really the symbol. I think there's a picture of this here. This is from Time Magazine website. There we go. This is the Marianne statue that symbolizes freedom and reason and other things that originate in the French Revolution. And so it's interesting that even that symbol was not immune to the wrath of the people that are going out to the streets. And speaking to a friend in France just 2 days ago, She told me that this is not just in Paris, this is happening throughout France, and that the people there, the people in France, are actually very, very furious and angry. And, this violence of those yellow vests people, that's how some of them are called, those who go out to the streets, these violent acts, they express some sort of a deep sense of deprivation, exploitation that they feel towards their governments. They feel like they're not being taken into account. They feel like they're being ignored. They feel like they're in a reality where their leaders or their government, that elite that rules, actually only cares for itself or doesn't care even close enough to what it should care with regards to what's happening with the common citizens. And these are, in many cases, very educated people that are going out to the streets, and not, not people from the very sidelines of society. And it just goes to show, if we think about human nature and what that means when people go out and they're vandalizing and torching and pillaging and brutally, rioting and in the face of cops and so forth. What does that mean? It shows you how human nature is human nature. When people feel that they're dispossessed from the little that they have left, and even though they will risk being chained and shackled in prison the next moment, if they reach a certain threshold that is beyond what they can take, emotionally speaking, they cannot be restrained. The human ego demands a certain level of fulfillment that it feels that it deserves. And when it feels like that is being taken too, then it cannot be restrained. Now, at the same time, this is an interesting thing that's happening. At the same time, in another place in the world, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, you have the French president, Emmanuel Macron, who is in the G20 summit, now is already back in France, I believe, but as I was speaking to my French friend, she said, like, the president is there, and all the rage is, in most of it, is funneled and directed towards this person, this persona, right? Because he's the president. And so, in the meantime, what's happening there in that G20 summit is that they're sitting around their table, and they're focused on their own self-interest and their own, political wins that they're trying to achieve. And if the common people the people who go out to the streets are driven by their ego that feels dispossessed and deprived and exploited, then those leaders, again, taking the perspective of human ego and how it works, they too are blinded, but in a different way. They too are driven by the ego, but in a different way. They're being blinded from seeing that network of global interdependence that they're all in. And everyone is trying to get their wins and get their, and be focused on their interests, and surely, you can say for the benefit of their country, and not getting into these political analyses, but just from a human nature perspective, this is what's happening. They too are largely ignoring and definitely not putting into focus that network of global interdependence that is being woven day by day around them. And so it's like they're in their own kind of snake den, or I don't know how to call it. There was actually, I think I can actually find it. There was actually an interesting item about how the cameras, some of the cameramen, the journalists who were there in the G20 summit, caught Macron and the Saudi Arabian prince talking off camera about something, and it doesn't even matter what. I'm not even interested in the details, but just kind of the feeling that you get from that is just clearly there is There is, I remember I had a professor in university for political science who used to say, there is the politics that you see on the screens and in the eyes of the camera, and there is the real politics, which is what they're, talking between them. And then what you see in the eyes of the camera is just a certain kind of a show, a charade, a certain kind of a superficial presentation of a certain aspect or layer of what they're actually, dealing with. And so they're in their own kind of can of worms of interests and clashing interests of their own. And more what we see is that that ruling elite is becoming more and more disconnected from the people. Europe, however, is particularly interesting if you take a global perspective, looking at what's happening in the world, because Europe is going through a bunch of things that are shaking it, a bunch of phenomena that are shaking the continent at the same time. You have social polarization and political instability that's always growing and growing, more extreme to both sides, to both to the right and to the left, more division and misunderstanding between each other. You have clashes of interests between leaders of countries, because Europe is not just one country, it's a bunch of many different countries that are somehow supposed to be grouped together or are supposed to be united into a certain superstructure. But even from that European Union, now more and more countries are considering withdrawing, like what is gradually happening with England with the Brexit. And on top of all of that, you have waves of mass immigration that are shaking the socio-cultural fabric of the continent and are undermining a lot of things that used to be foundations of the culture. But from the perspective of that network that connects us, from the perspective of the wisdom of Kabbalah, and if you try to understand what's happening in the world, the biggest blow, the thing that will shake that continent and actually the world the most, is economics. And if you go back to these riots and you look at what's happening today, what are they rioting and protesting about? About essentially the trigger is the cost of fuel and the cost of living in general. And so is it really that money is lacking? What's actually happening here? There is a growing dissonance between affluence and potential abundance, at least, and real day-to-day poverty, or a worsening in the standards of life that the so-called middle class is experiencing. And so you have this artificial gap that is becoming wider and clearer as well, meaning that there are billions and billions of euros that are flowing across the system, but for some reason there's not enough for so many people. The current system and how it's built, the current economic system, just can't provide for everyone in a way that it distributes that abundance in a way that it works. And again, this is not an economics lecture or a political lecture. This is just a bird's eye view on the situation. And so add to that what is now gradually happening from day to day as well, exponentially developing, is a technological, industrial revolution, where it's very much expected that hundreds of millions of jobs will be lost to automation and technology and AI, artificial intelligence driven systems. And so we're coming to a point where there's actually no need for a lot of the people that are in the workforce. Now, again, have those the Paris riots in mind, and they're very extreme. They're saying, again, my friend was saying this is the worst they had in 50 years. They haven't seen anything like that in 50 years in France. And this is happening for several weeks, almost a month, meaning people to hold that, to hold such a protest for that long means that people are really aggravated and really furious. And it's not just Paris, it's all over France. And so if you think about that, and if you think about the scenario of what will happen when, say, 50 or 60% of the people, due to reasons such as the technological revolution, will find themselves outside of the workforce and unable to get back into it, at that point, if that happens in just one country in Europe, which is intertwined in so many ways, the rules of the game itself will have to change. It's not that difficult to imagine a social riot just like the one we saw in Paris this week and last week and the last couple of weeks becoming something like a European Spring. If you think of the Arab Spring a couple of years ago. And so, infecting and spreading through the continent. Now, about that prediction that I promised I'll talk about as well. Let me just show you that. So already today, this was published a couple of days ago. Already today, there's a group of wait a second. There we go. There's a group of mathematicians from Poland who are saying a global financial crisis of unprecedented scale is on the way. Now, they go into a little bit of the details of why they're saying that, and I'll give you the summary of it. In a nutshell, first of all, this is not economists. This is important to understand, and you also probably won't find this in the mainstream kind of very popular media outlets. But this was published, as you can see, less than a week ago. So what's interesting here is that this is a group of mathematicians who are just basically looking at numbers, statistics, and they're saying there's a thing called the Hurst component or the Hurst number or something like that, which basically predicts the stability of the stock market. And so what they're seeing is that from 2008, the stability that number represents has been declining, and now they're looking at at where it is today. And again, if you want to read the article, I'll put the link in the description later. But basically what they're saying is within 12 years, there should be a global financial meltdown of unprecedented scale. Now, this is a group of mathematicians, they can always say, we're just doing models, we're, dealing with statistics. It may happen, it may not happen. If it can happen, we can say, and they write it in the article, if it happens, we can say, we told you so. If it doesn't happen, we can say that it didn't happen because we warned you. But really, add to that we're all in an integrated, interdependent state. The entire world, the whole world is connected. And so chain reactions are inseparable to how the system works. The whole system is a chain reaction. The Arab Spring thing, for instance, was not something that was predicted in that sense. So even if you put that prediction by the mathematicians aside, when you take into account that we're all in an integrated system, this means that a trigger in one place can spark a chain reaction throughout the entire system. So therefore, such a thing may even happen before. And so one way or another, we're looking at a situation where if you look at the technological revolution that is fast approaching in giant steps, in exponential steps, And you realize that at some point governments or leaders will have to provide to people in some way or other. And this is not, again, not a lecture on economics, but in one way or another, if 50, 60, 70% of the people are out of the workforce and have no way to provide for themselves, they will have to receive some form or other of a guaranteed universal basic income in some sort of way. It will have to happen. Governments are obviously already are aware of that. There's a lot of debate and a lot of arguments and some pilot programs and all that. That's a topic for a whole other conversation, which we can have at some point. But back to the wisdom of Kabbalah and how it views this whole situation. The interesting thing is that if people receive what they need from society, then that means social values will have to change. Because, see, economics from Kabbalah's perspective, from the perspective of the network that connects us, economics is merely a reflection of human relations. It's about what you and I and every one of us gives to and receives from society. Forget the numbers, forget math, forget the stock market, forget banks. These are just artificial structures built on top of a very simple reality that humans relate to each other within a closed system, and they transact, meaning interact with each other and give to each other and receive from each other just like any other superorganism. And so this is really what economics is. This is the systems of economics are simply a reflection of human relations. And if the individual will have to receive their basic necessities from society, that means that we will no longer as individuals be judged by how much money we make and by what we do, by our job. This means that there is a gap for new social values to form, and in that gap, in that new kind of vacant space of forming new social values, you can expect a lot of war to take place. Not necessarily, and hopefully not violent, war with weapons, but certainly an ideological war between leaders, religions, belief systems, radical activists and ideologies who will all try to kind of get into that spot. And the question is, what will really bring people into balance between themselves, and what will form the new concept of social values in humanity? And Kabbalah says, well, we have to be in balance with nature. And if we go in that direction, we'll be able to maintain balance between each other as well. We have to activate that inherent wiring that exists in us, in potential, in every human being. There is this potential mechanism of connecting with other human beings on a deeper level than just talking to each other with words and dialogues and understanding each other through language. There is a common humanity that we all share. There is a mechanism of inherent wiring for human connection that we all have, and we need to learn how to activate it. Or in other words, we need to learn how to plug into that network that already connects us. And that is where humanity is going. And that is why what's happening in the world these days, including those riots in Paris, are really seeds of a global, integral, inevitable transition that is gradually taking shape in mankind. This was kind of my pitch for today, if you will. I don't want to expand more before looking at some of your questions to see what you'd like to expand on. So if you want to send some questions, thoughts, angles you'd like us to expand on, definitely go and throw that into the chat. And in a moment, I'm going to add Tal Mandelbaum to our discussion, and let's see what she has in store for us. So we'll have Tal right after this. And hello, Tal Mandelbaum, my dear friend, longtime Kabbalah student, psychologist, a lot of other great stuff can be said about you. How are you doing? Okay, I have to be honest and say that I cannot hear you at the moment.
Now you can hear me.
Okay,
I was trying to.
so now I can hear you. It's good that I was honest, because otherwise our listeners wouldn't hear you as well. Okay, so now everyone can hear you. How are you?
I believe in honesty always. Yeah, thanks. No, I was just saying that it was so interesting to listen to you describe everything that's going on. That is so chaotic, and yet you explain how it all kind of fits in a very structured process that is so important for us to see. And what I wanted to add on a little bit is really about the psychology of change and why it is that revolutions happen from a wider angle, and also to understand what we go through in the process. And I think we all know that change is not something that we like very much. It's not easy to change. We like to be in a state that is known to us, that we're comfortable in. And most of us change when a lot of external pressure, just starts happening in our jobs, in our relationships, and when something isn't working. And then when enough pressure is there, we inevitably make a change. And of course, this is different from person to person. I personally have a hard time making changes. I hang on to dear life, to every relationship or job, even if it isn't working. And I really try to make it work until it's just obvious that it's not. And then I make a change. But we can be smarter than that, and a lot of people are. And if we learn, I think, the general flow of where we're heading, then it will be easier for us to make this change. So first of all, I'd like to talk about, once we've talked about what happens inside us, what it is that drives change on a more societal level. Because just like with us, we are all a will to receive, as Kabbalah tells us. We have our internal mechanism that simply wants to enjoy, that simply wants to receive pleasure. And so when
Tal,
nature,
just to say a word there, you're also coming to this after looking into a conversation that you had with, or maybe a series of conversations that you had with Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman on social revolutions and the nature of social revolutions and how it plays out, right? So,
exactly.
okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really interesting, where Kabbalah explains what drives change in human society. And Kabbalah tells us that human beings are the will to receive. We each have this need to enjoy, to feel good. And then when nature wants to drive change, and nature is constantly changing, it's constantly in this process of evolution. So to push people to change, it creates pressure on our will to receive, where the ego is constantly growing, the will to receive is constantly growing and feeling unfulfilled. And then it causes us to create new forms of social interaction and social connection, just as you were saying before, forms of economics. We went from the kind of agricultural way of life to feudalism, to capitalism, to the industrial evolution. And in each at each point in time, people experienced tremendous amounts of pressure and felt unfulfilled to great extents that pushed them to change. But really, what Kabbalah is saying is that these states that we are moving into, they all already exist. It's not like it's coming out of nowhere. Somebody wakes up in the morning and decides he wants to make a certain change. No, these states already exist in a kind of seed form, and we feel a pressure that's pushing us to change, and then we discover what that change actually is. We discover it, we implement it, we begin to live it. And I think this is actually
So,
interesting
so,
also for us
so,
on.
the, so the seeds of what to paraphrase what you're saying is the seeds of revolution lie within evolution, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Evolution and revolution are closely intertwined. It's basically nature driving us to make changes through this pressure on our.
Would you say this is something that is apparent in evolutionary psychology as well? Like some of the processes that we see in a child growing up are, the rebellion stage, for instance, or when they suddenly, even just start walking versus crawling is a kind of a revolution that has to do with losing balance on a certain level and then to rise to a new kind of balance, more intricate balance on a higher level.
Or that you don't feel satisfied. They don't feel satisfied anymore with their current stage, and their desire grows, and they want more. They want to discover more. And they're able at the same time. They're also able to do more. So in there, it's a very natural process. But I think that it's an interesting example, children, because there it's very clear to us to see that the stages of their development already are existing. And you've got the sperm already contains the information of the grown human being, and we can see it ahead of time. We can predict it. And when it comes to human evolution, when you look at a bigger scale, a larger scale, it's hard for us to predict what will happen. But still, that shouldn't make us think that this process is not going to be happening just as it is with a child, that we'll be discovering states that are already planned out from the seed, from the very beginning of creation. So, and this is, I think, something that's really nice to know about our own, personal changes, because so often we feel afraid of change and afraid to let go of something that we already have and is known to us, because we don't see that life is pushing us out of a certain situation so that we would discover a new and better and more evolved state for us personally. And if we knew that, I think we would trust the process a little more and make change like more easily than we usually do. So, well, the next point I want to talk about is that we've been talking about how change happens. And we've seen that throughout human history, all of these revolutions were happening where human desire was not feeling fulfilled. It was being pressured. It was feeling uneasy. And then it developed new forms of social connection to fulfill those needs. But the next revolution, what is now going on, and you did speak about that, is something very, very special. Because unlike all the previous revolutions that we had, where our desire grew and we changed our reality to fit that desire, today something very unique and different needs to happen. And that instead of just changing our external reality to fit our inner desire, nature is pushing us to change ourselves, to change man in order to change the world. And this is something that is very special and is happening for the first time. It's really, until now, you've seen, like you talked about the European spring that can come about, and we've seen this happening with the Arab Spring, where people would go out to the streets frustrated and angry and throw down governments and blame other people or other groups for the situation that wasn't working. And we see that really that doesn't suit us anymore. We have to find a new way of creating a revolution or a change that doesn't put the blame on somebody else, and think that if we bring like a different leader or a different party or a different group to lead our countries, that would create a better reality. It's not working that way. Today, because we have a sense that we want equal societies, societies where we can really feel safe and connected, then we need a new kind of revolution where we don't put the blame on others, but on our own egoistic nature. And this is the big point of awareness that Kabbalah is talking about, when people will finally become aware that the thing that is really driving everything and yet also ruining every situation we reach is our own what's called the evil inclination or the ego, or that part of us that is self-interested and is not able to see the benefit of the whole. And therefore, and you talked a lot about this with the leaders and how they're disconnected from the people and the self-interest that is not enable them to see the network of interconnection that we're living in. So Kabbalah is showing up at this point in time and saying, before we go and and overthrow more governments and hope that that will bring about a better future, let's realize who's the real enemy here, which is our common ego. And so this next revolution is really an educational revolution. And the first step would be for all of us to recognize our ego, to understand what it is, how it runs us, how it controls us, and then to connect between us, which will be the thing that will enable us to step out of our ego, excuse me, and beat it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all of those points. By the way, I'll just mention that, and also for joining us, even though you're still recovering from an illness. So I'll just mention that if anyone's interested in listening or watching these conversations that Tal Mandelbaum is having with Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman, and specifically on this topic, maybe we can put the links later in the description, or at least to the main relevant one with regards to the things that you've pointed out, and then people can go deeper into it if you're interested. I picked up something from the chat. I see a lot of comments on the chat, kind of like identifying or adding some angles to this whole view that we're putting together. And there's something from John Trevi1, user John Trevi1, who said, look at the Russia Revolution. It sounded great on paper, but it was too quick, and neither the Russian people nor their leaders were ready. And that is exactly right. I don't know, John Trevi1, if you are familiar or not, but Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, Baal HaSulam, wrote in his very important article, The Peace, he dedicates a section there just specifically to talk about. Actually, Tal, it would be great if you can dig up that quote or like a paragraph from the article, if you have it, if you can find it at hand. So anyway, he talks about how what happened in Russia was really the opposite, the exact opposite of what is supposed to happen. And this is exactly what Tal was talking about as well, and what she discussed with regards to revolution and evolution with Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman. What needs to happen with us, human beings, is that we have to rise to a higher level of consciousness. That is the only thing that will unite us. See, Kabbalah doesn't talk about your classic socialism or any kind of ism, really. It doesn't. Sure, things on this planet will have to change. On a physical level as well, we will have to find ways to reorganize human society. But first and foremost, we have to reorganize ourselves, and that means our interior selves. We have to develop, according to Kabbalah, something called intention. We have to develop a higher level of relating to each other that is not just the natural ego drive that we have. We have to develop a broader, deeper perception of ourselves as an integrated collective entity, as an integrated entity. And so we have to sense reality in a whole new way. So according to Kabbalah, that natural human ego that we all have is not going to go away, and nor do we need to try to eradicate it in some way. Baal HaSulam says exactly, Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag says exactly the opposite. This is what they tried to do in Russia. that failed miserably. They tried to coerce and force people to behaving in a certain way. You can't do that. It's like going against gravity. It's not about that being wrong morally or not. That's not how Kabbalists view reality. They simply look at human interaction and human dynamics as another representation of the laws of nature. And so trying to go against, trying to go against the human ego, I hope you can hear me okay. Trying to go against the human ego is like trying to go against gravity. Instead, you have to learn how to build a certain structure that will use that gravity in a new way, like a plane that is capable, tons can go up to the air if you know how to use the laws of nature correctly. And that's what we need to do. We need to find a way to repurpose the human ego in order to benefit the whole. And that is an inner transformation, and like Tal mentioned, a spiritual transformation that is driven by education first. That is really the main thing that we can do for humanity, that we can do for ourselves. Educate ourselves about our nature, about the fact that we're all in an integrated system, that we're interconnected, that we're interdependent, and most importantly, that nature is pushing us, just as it pushed all of nature before us, before even humans were evolved. The still vegetative, animate levels of nature, all moving towards greater, more intricate connection. That's what's happening to humans. That's all. And what we need to develop is beyond the individual egos, not instead, but beyond, above that, we have to develop a collective kind of perception, a collective kind of sensation that will enable us to reorganize society in the correct way. So according to Kabbalah, no, true and lasting and beneficial change can happen unless we do it together with our internal evolution. So no change on the outside can be forced and work unless the human evolves and changes from inside out. Tal, do you happen to find a quote for us from the Peace article?
Yes, I
You
think you
did?
should take a look at it.
Thank you.
I think you should take a look at it and see which part you want to read because it's pretty long.
All right.
In the meantime, I wanted to add something to what you said. Like you were saying.
Did you send it to me in our chat or something?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. So I'll look into that. Yeah, go ahead.
So, like you were saying, all of these changes, like what happened in Russia was they tried to force a certain equality upon people, and that didn't work. And in here, we're talking about this change first happening from within, thanks to an educational process. And then only these people who have actually changed from within to experience life in a connected way, in a sense that they really care for one another and are able to put their self-interest and egoism aside to see the benefit of the whole and truly wish to contribute in such a way, only they can later, and Kabbalah speaks of these stages of first acknowledging our ego, acknowledging the problem, then educating and changing man to be able to connect and rise above self-interest. And then the last stage would be that people who have changed would then continue and actually create those structures in society that would fit this change that happened within them, rather than first changing society and then expecting man to conform to that. It needs to be a very gradual process of change that is only summed up by an external change in society, which happens naturally and willingly. So that's the only thing that can actually make this change last.
Right. So just to follow up on this, the quote from Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag. So we can also give a link to the Peace article in the description for those interested. But it is kind of a quote that's integrated of the whole piece. HaSulam goes into great length in the article to explain that every time he says creator or God or the upper force, he means nature and nature's plan. And so, and he goes into, there's a whole page where he discusses how, you know, if you call it like this or call it like that, it's the same thing in terms of how the laws of nature work. And then he says that, he talks about how history itself has troubled in our favor and prepared for us an established fact, sufficient for a full appreciation and unequivocal conclusion. Anyone can see how a large society, such as the state of Russia, with hundreds of millions in population, more land than the whole of Europe, second to none in wealth and raw materials, etc., etc., has sunk ever lower. And then later on he says, what was their mistake? What was the problem? He says, this nation has made one mistake that nature, if you will, or the Creator will not forgive. And that is that that all the work that they try to do, namely bestowal upon others, has to be in line with the higher force of nature. And because they did not do their work for that sake, for that purpose, from nature's point of view, they had no right to exist. So, we're dealing with a natural evolutionary process. And so the power that Kabbalah gives us in our hands is, first of all, to look at what's happening, even those riots taking place in Europe right now. And from that sort of seemingly disconnected, violent event, see a footprint of evolution and connect to that bigger process, and start seeing reality in a whole new way, and adjusting our mindset towards that as well, which actually saves us a lot of pain. Everything that needs to, a lot of the suffering, or maybe all of the suffering, and the chaos that we kind of get into as a human society could be saved from us. Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag says in another article, if we just understand what nature wants from us. So that's essentially what the wisdom of Kabbalah is here for. And yes, there is a wisdom that actually tells us what nature wants from us. It comes from, not from some, from a cloud high up above, or some, you know, mystical messenger. It comes from people who have developed that sensitivity. Every person has that inner connection to nature in potential. And the only question is whether we develop it or not. That's what Kabbalists have done and are laying out a method for us to do it as well. Okay, let's see if we can take some questions, or look at some of the stuff that is happening here in the comments. I'll try to, there's a bunch of things, so let's do this. I'll play for you guys, and Tal, please stay with us as well if you can. I'll play for us a video clip. This is something that I have produced with a few friends, actually almost exactly 2 years ago. And it's interesting to see how reality is kind of gradually unfolding in that direction as we were trying to express in that video clip. So I'll play that for you guys, and after that we'll take a look at what's happening in the chat before we conclude. So hope you enjoy this.
Several trends and conditions in the world are now converging into an inevitable transition to a new socioeconomic order. A new world is imminent. The ruling elite at the top is becoming increasingly disconnected from the people below. The middle class is crumbling, becoming ever more poor. Unemployment is rising as factories outsource to countries where they hire for a fraction of Western salaries. And ultimately, AI and automation will make most of today's jobs obsolete. In parallel, humans are undergoing a psychological evolution. We begin to realize there has to be more to life than the cyclical consumption of goods and services, continuously fueled by manipulative media and advertising agencies that struggle to keep their grip on our minds. With so many of us questioning, what is the purpose of this rat race? It's no wonder depression became the leading cause of disability. Income inequality continues to widen. People grow hopeless chasing their own survival while food, clothing, housing, all necessities could be easily provided to all of the world's people. Yet, at this point in time, we are much closer to World War III than we are to reorganizing society around the planet so that industry and production will create abundance for all. With unemployment becoming widespread and irreversible around the planet, a social time bomb is ticking under the surface. In every country, the ruling elite is beginning to take notice, but they aren't seeing the overall process as they are mostly concerned with preserving their power. We've entered the last stretch of egoistic socioeconomics where a wealthy few enjoy the labor of many. Feudalism, early capitalism, and neoliberalism were gradual steps of maximizing and exhausting our egoistic relationships to their fullest. Socioeconomics based on human egoism alone is coming to its implosion. With or without another world war, a new socioeconomic order will inevitably take shape. And it will be accompanied by a major psychological transformation. Discovering our positive human connection as a new source of fulfillment and prosperity. Decades of research in multiple fields, biology, psychology, neuroscience, and more, all point to a fundamental truth. Human beings are wired for social connection, and our lasting happiness is rooted in the positive connections we make. The challenge we now face as a civilization is how to reorganize society with the least amount of chaos and suffering. The concept of working for a living will have to go. Governments will provide people with some form of a universal basic income. At the same time, the artificial link between materialism and happiness will be untangled as people will learn how to nurture their positive connection, and essentially turning it into a new kind of industry. Excessive consumption will shrink as people will be less focused on material acquisition. Social norms and values will change as people will link their happiness with positive relations. Social ailments like depression and stress will decrease as the mentality of cooperation and reciprocity will increase. Our social cohesion will become the new source of confidence, while the accumulation of wealth will eventually be seen as an unrewarding, futile rat race. The future is inevitable. The future is human connection.
Right, all right. Hopefully everyone can hear us again. Tal, are you with us as well?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you are. Okay,
Right.
good. Okay, so the future is human connection. We have a question from Funny Games 93. Funny Games 93 is asking, is this topic related to end times or end of times, I guess? Will we be able to see a jump to a higher consciousness soon, or does it only depend on us? Great question. Yes, it is related perhaps to what you're referring to, end of times. Kabbalah explains a simple thing. Evolution, human evolution, does have a certain process that it needs to reach, and we are gradually developing towards that. Think of it like DNA, like genes, just like an individual human being evolves and goes through steps of being a baby, then like a child, a teenager, an adult, and the physical body has a certain evolution that it needs to go through. All of humanity as a society also has a certain evolutionary purpose, and that is embedded in the laws of nature. The fact that we are not aware of it or don't see it or are unfamiliar with it is our lack of perception, but it's integrated into that. Now, as part of that process, there is a certain jump to a higher consciousness that we need to evolve, to that collective consciousness that we need to cultivate. The problem here is when you're asking, will this happen soon? The problem is that on the one hand, it has to happen because it's embedded in the natural evolution of humanity. On the other hand, there is one problematic thing that Kabbalah explains, and that is free choice. We do have free choice. There is a certain latitude. Free choice is a whole discussion, and we're not going to get into that. If you're interested in these topics more in depth, I'm going to put a link right at the end of this broadcast to our Kabbalah Fundamentals course, which is a free course that you can all sign up to and learn more about that. But in a nutshell, there is a certain latitude that human beings have in developing themselves. There is a certain part where they have to participate in their own evolution. There is a conscious evolution that needs to take place, and therefore we're getting close to where that needs to happen. On the other hand, how fast or how slow, how tormenting or how smooth and enjoyable and adventurous the process will be, that depends on us and our free choice. Tal, you want to throw a word about this too?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just something small that I think is nice to think about is that when we think of the end of times, we think of the world being over, but Kabbalah is talking about, like Asaf was saying, just a new level of our consciousness. And what's interesting is as long as we are living within our egoistic perception, we do experience the world in time and space. But once we move into this new level of consciousness, of connectedness, then we actually rise above time and are able to experience reality in a new way, which in fact does, and does create an end of time. But it in no way means that we stop existing, rather that we go into a new level of existence that transcends time and space. So I think that's also a nice thing to think about when considering this term that sounds a bit dark. It's really not dark at all. It's very inspiring.
All right. Yeah, so, okay, I do see, look, there's, here's the thing. There's a bunch of different comments that happened in the chat. I think some of them we kind of, if they were like something that we could relate to, we kind of did in our discussion. We probably and may have missed a few tangents there and a few subtopics, but we are almost at an hour broadcast, and we are trying to make these things up to an hour. So I do have another surprise for everyone, which is a music video that I want to play for you. This is something that comes from Seth Brightman, who's another KabU instructor, an instructor in our online Kabbalah Education Center, and Aaron, who is a musician and also inspired by the wisdom of Kabbalah. And so we actually had a talk about this maybe a year ago or a few months ago, about this whole future of socioeconomics, how the rules of the game itself will have to change. And so these guys are musicians, so they wanted to express this in a song, in music, and so that is what I came up with for everyone to conclude this broadcast. So I think we'll sign off.
It's a great video.
Yeah, so I think
I personally love it. Everybody's gonna enjoy it.
Okay, great. So I think we'll sign off with that. I don't know, any concluding words, Tal, that you think we should say here? Other than it's really great to see all the folks here connecting and really contributing to this discussion. It feels like, I'll say it, in one sentence. Then you go, then we play the music video. I want to say
Okay.
that it's really inspiring and hopeful and powerful when a lot of people together in a broadcast like this, using the internet as a tool to further our understanding that we are connected, and that's where all of humanity is going. It's hopeful, it's inspiring, and we should do this more and with more and more people. So your concluding words. And
Right. I agree, and I feel also the same way. It makes me very happy to be here and see everyone, because by talking about it, hearing it, sharing these understandings, I think we can make change happen in a conscious way instead of being pushed by pressure. Like we were talking about before, we can make this change happen together, and then it will happen in a pleasant and smooth way, which I think will benefit everyone.
okay, so we're exactly, I think, at an hour broadcast. This was KabNET Live for today. If you liked this this broadcast, if you liked this concept and you wanted to continue, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Click the like button. Let us know in the comments, not just in the live chat, but in the comments, if you want more of this, and anything else you think that we should know about. We'll put later on some links, relevant links that we mentioned in the description, so definitely check back and look at that. And we'll be signing off. Enjoy this music video from Seth and Aaron. So goodbye, folks. Bye, everyone.
So I spoke to my buddies Seth and Aaron about this rant I did on how we could all be playing a different kind of game in society. Now Seth pulled out his guitar, Aaron started rhyming, and this is what happened.
Change the game, we're hoarded, become solely. Change the game, we're here with the most those wins. Make a game, you know we started in New Jersey. Make a game, where the best one is the one who gives. 2018, it's the same game, so lame. People still chasing money, chasing fame, and it ain't changed. But we're all drained, ain't nobody satisfied, but we don't know how to escape. The have just wanna have more than the next man. The have-nots are so poor, they don't know what's next, man. So tell me, what's a tax plan? Only way to change the world is to change man. Not through regulation, but through education. The paper ain't gonna help, cause our values need changing, and we can cultivate it. We need a transformation. Respect to those who give and give shame in the taking. Respect to the builders of good human relations. Change won't trickle down, only we can save us. It's a new day, the whole game is changing. We'll start it in Jersey, and we gonna make it. Oh, let it trickle down, get it trickle down, down. Trickle down. Can the people unite below? Can the love come from the ground? Oh, let it trickle down, can it trickle down, down. It's gotta trickle down. Can the people unite below? Can the love come from the ground? And I hate to say it, but if we change places, you find me playing the same game the tycoons are playing. The point that I'm making, the problems in our nature. I don't care who I take from, long as I'm gaining. And I'll tell you more, the terms rich and poor ain't about the amount of things you can afford. After necessities, it's all about social status. For us, money is God, and we worship who has it. And I hope we'll see the game's all rigged. If we can turn it around, then everybody can win. Cause we cannot be fulfilled, no matter how much we get. We just want more than the rest. We want the others' respect. But we can redefine success. What we call more and what we call less. We'll all win when we learn to connect. So let's make a new game. The one who gives is the best.
hoard, it becomes holy. Change the game, change the game. We're here with the most, those wins. Make a game, make a game. Come on, we started in New Jersey. Make a game, make a game. Where the best one is the one who gives.